We have one council member ill this evening, Council Member Holland. And we have one item on our discussion, and I believe, Bob, you probably have that one, Bob Carrier. That's to review proposed changes to the city procurement code, or maybe Elizabeth has it. Well, that's okay.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. I have two items to present to you tonight. Provided I can get Elmo to work.
When he said two items, he meant under A, is that correct? Did you?
Brief items, yes. Yes. They are both on the agenda, I believe. One is the procurement code changes. The other is proposed resolution.
It's for what?
Proposed resolution.
Okay.
The code changes.
For the procurement code changes.
One item.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I got it. Thanks. The two items, as I indicated, one is proposed changes to the procurement ordinance. The other item is a proposed resolution. I wanted to clarify and make sure that you understood that while both may be related, they're independent. The procurement code changes we'll go through first. The resolution concerns an authority for the city manager's ability to approve purchases that have not been previously budgeted. Okay.
Bob, can you get a little closer to that mic?
That or speak up, huh? I think I can speak louder than I can read better, but the current procurement code, Elizabeth Simpson and I have been working on this for quite some time. And just to clarify, this was, we looked at several procurement codes, other cities, the state, and we realized that, and we attempted to rewrite our own. We then realized that probably the best way to do this would be to take the state's code, modify it to fit the city needs. Subsequent to that, we did do that. We made changes, we deleted items, and we added items. But the state's procurement code is what was used as the foundation. Please stop me as I go along. I get to a point where I may just be breezing through this, and I don't want to leave, ask me questions as we go if you don't mind. The proposed changes to the current code, a few of the highlights is it would provide the flexibility and accountability in city procurements. These items I will go into a little more detail a little bit later. It'll increase the city's economic advantage by consolidating the procurements. Currently, we are somewhat decentralized, or mainly decentralized, and we may be buying the same item over and over without the other person knowing it. It will ensure fair and equitable treatment of all of those who deal with the city's procurement process, which goes along with increasing the public's confidence in our procedures. It'll be uniform. The public will be assured that we've gone through the processes that will be outlined. Additionally, and it's also it's not a prime reason for it, but it was supported by the fact that the Matrix report did recommend that we proceed with the centralizing of procurement. The procurement code changes will be that first step. That will make some significant changes, both flexibility and accountability in the current code. Excuse me while I change papers here. I've got I believe each of you have a copy of this in your packet. This was a matrix that we developed that will attempt to highlight or to contrast the current code with what we're proposing on the highlight on the major issues. There are issues, major items. There are other changes, not as significant as these, and I believe each of you have a copy of the proposed code in your packet. Currently, the city's bid threshold for an informal solicitation is $1,500. That basically says that at $1,500 we have to get 3 bids, whether they be written or verbal. We are proposing that we increase that to $5,000. Along with that will be, those dollar limits will be delegated from the procurement officer down to department directors, and there will be, stipulations as to the process you need to follow and where it would be appropriate to make a purchase at $5,000 without competition. We basically are raising it to $5,000 with reasonable and adequate competition. So it may not be reasonable to go buy a $5,000 item. In certain circumstances, it may very well be, without obtaining the quotes first. The threshold today for the current, under the current code is $30,000 for a formal solicitation. The formal solicitation is when you go through the public process. It has to be advertised in the paper. There are other formal requirements that need to be adhered to. We are proposing to raise that limit to $50,000. Both of those limits are currently, actually the state has a higher no-bid limit if I recall, but the $50,000 formal solicitation is the same level at the state at this point and some other cities. I think it's reasonable given today's inflation, considering when the original code was written. I think at times $50,000 may be reasonable. All of these, keep in mind, doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to get the competition. It may be the method that we, may be a more expeditious method of doing that. The proposed code will designate the procurement officer, who will be delegated by the city manager, as the centralized procurement authority for the city. Currently, we're decentralized, meaning that each department and at times each section are doing their own procurements, sometime under their own methods. While they may be legal, they may not necessarily follow good practice. Yes.
If I may, now, in the past, the city manager was permitted to authorize anything under $30,000. Is that correct? Now you're putting another part in this formula, and that's the procurement officer. Does that include yourself, for example, as the purchasing agent for the city?
I currently am Mayor Kavanaugh, Councilmember Sousa, I am currently designated as the procurement officer. That was delegated by the city manager.
Okay.
I think where your question, and I understand what you're saying, is that the city manager in the past has been able to approve $30,000. I will clarify that, and that is actually the second item that I would like to propose in the resolution. Once this code goes into effect, as it stands today, if you passed it as it is today, the city manager would not have any unbudgeted authority. Okay? The limits that we are talking about now are strictly when the code that you will have passed says that we have to go and get 3 written bids, 3 verbals, or go through a formal process. It is not tied to approvals. Did I answer your question, or did I just confuse the issue?
Well, maybe I'm ahead of the game here, as far as the question is concerned.
Okay.
Would this be after the fact, after your presentation, or the second part of your presentation?
The second part of this, yes,
Leave it go
there
there.
is a resolution that will cover that, yes.
All right, let's leave it go till then.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Bob, who do you work for?
Currently report to Larry Lang, Finance Director. Any other questions current at this point? Okay. The current code does not recognize at all a City of Goodyear vendor. And I need to say to keep in mind that this is not a preference that we are proposing, but it is tied directly to the sales tax that we as a city pay a vendor when we make a purchase. If that vendor is in the City of Goodyear, we will get that tax back when they file their return. If it is from a Phoenix vendor, we will not get the tax back. We will have paid it, and there is no advantage to the city at all, or any advantage to a local vendor. What we are proposing is, during the evaluation process, to take in account the difference in the sales tax that we would pay a local vendor versus someone outside of the City of Goodyear, and consider that we will be receiving that back. So basically, that difference would be the amount that he would basically have. It's not really a preference, and we're trying to make sure that we all understand it's not a preference. It's tied strictly to the taxes that come back to us. So in essence, our net cost is not what we're actually paying. Okay? Emergency procurements, currently the mayor is the only person who can declare or approve an emergency procurement. I'm proposing that the procurement officer will be allowed to make emergency procurements or designate someone to make a procurement. And this is the way we were thinking about this, and I apologize for giving just thoughts in my mind, but currently the mayor, if he makes a declaration of an emergency, we were looking at that being a city emergency. An emergency procurement and an emergency for the city may be different, maybe 2 different items. As much as I would hate to say it, the procurement officer would be able to authorize, as an emergency procurement, something that was purchased due to procrastination. Won't happen often, but realistically and in the real world, things happen sometime. We may have made a mistake, it may be an administrative error, and it didn't get ordered. And now you're at the point where you don't have the time to go through the process. It will still be made with what competition is reasonable and adequate. So if you can just as easily get 3 bids, we would do that. We may not go through a formal process, but we would get it done to take care of the immediate need. And that's the intent of that. This would put an emergency that the mayor declared would be a city emergency, not necessarily tied directly to a procurement, even though procurements would follow if there were an emergency declared. Yes.
On that subject, I mean, you use the example of procrastination, but would a more, another example be if, say, a fire engine caught fire and burned up and we're down a fire truck and got to get one underway? Would that be within your authority then to
Yes. Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Otoniak. That would be
not that a fire truck would ever burn in the city of Goodyear, Chief. Sorry, I saw the snickering going on.
That would be an emergency.
Okay.
That would follow your normal emergency process.
But the mayor could also still.
Right.
The mayor can still, yes.
That doesn't change his power.
It doesn't delete his power.
Okay.
What it does is it expedites that particular situation. If the mayor's not available, or it just expedites it somewhat. It takes another person out of the loop, and that's not a matter of, I mean, what you don't see here, and we haven't written those yet, is the rules that go along with implementing the code, which would be more of an admin or a regulation. One of the things that could be in that is the fact that all emergencies are reported to the council or to the mayor. It would be after the fact.
I would. You hit the.
That's the way it is today.
Yeah. Well, yes. Except I remember very first being on council, you get thrown into the budget, and we get sworn in early June, and we went on break July, and there was an emergency purchase for $750. You may remember this. $750,000 or so, and change or lower, a little bit within that range, for an emergency water pump. A well went down back in July of '03. And I remember going, some of us are gone on vacation for a month. You come back to your memo box and you read the memo. It didn't describe how that notification took place. And it seemed to me we had quite the deliberation on items that were $100,000, $200,000, and all of a sudden it was a $750,000 procurement for a pump. And it was just a simple memo that if by chance I happened to be in town and go by my box, I picked up, which I didn't find was an acceptable form of communication at the time. Vocalized that at the time to the manager. But I'd urge you to specify, how that notification takes place and in what form in your rules and procedures that are forthcoming.
The next item, which seems like a minor item but can be currently cause a lot of confusion, is common terms in the current code are not defined. It just puts it out there and it doesn't say what it is. The proposed code will define all terms in each section of the code. The rules that will be written or regulations will define the process. Change orders. Currently, all change orders over 10% come to the City Council for approval. That's whether it's a $100 change order or a $1 million change order. What we are proposing is that the procurement officer be allowed to approve a change order in excess of the 10% if the percentage is important, and it would not have to come to council provided it was already budgeted in that line. Provided you had sufficient funding, we could make a change order to the contract without council approval. And basically, when you approved the budget, you approved that dollar for that item anyway.
Yes.
Mayor Kavanaugh. Yeah.
So if we budgeted an item for $1 million, but a bidder comes in at $750,000, and they come back to you with a $75,000 or $80,000 change order on a project, you're putting it within your authority to approve that change order.
As long as it stays under the $1 million that was budgeted.
Right.
I mean, I would approve the change order anyway, but it would then come to council if it exceeds the budgeted amount.
Right. So in that example I just gave, it would, though extreme, would have to be $251,000 before it would come to council. Which seems like an awful lot of authority or responsibility that rests on procurement officers, even though it's within the budget, which
Right.
we,
Right.
But we're seeing, just in our industry, from work experience, I saw a $92 million bid come in today at $84 million. Let me tell you, as an elected official, I'm going to find somewhere to put that $7 million or $8 million.
Well,
That's extra real quick. So I wouldn't want,
Okay.
I guess I'm looking maybe for a ceiling in that, or some sort of rationale in the sense that, 10% not exceeding $100,000, or, something that, because then you as a procurement officer aren't getting taken to task by a contractor. They got to come to the 7 of us and explain publicly why they're going to be $100,000 over, which puts pressure on the bottom line to keep it there, keep it at the bidded amount.
Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, council members, very valid point. One of the things that I have not said is that all of the emergency procurement, change order, all of this is done with a determination that will be written with written justification as to why. And, some of you may know me well enough, I won't just necessarily sign off. It needs to be valid, it needs to be reasonable, and if I have any doubt, it goes up the ladder.
Well, I think
But we can-
the question is, you may not always be here.
Yeah.
So I think that what we need is be sure whatever we put down in here will live longer than, say, your tenure with the city. So I think that's where the concern is.
Right, I understand. Thank you.
What objection do you have with the current code on that?
I don't. The current part of that, what I've seen is that we've taken, and there's been some small change orders, small dollars, and it's an expeditious. It's just the way to speed it up a little bit, if possible. I've seen some small dollar items that went on a change order that then had to get on the council agenda.
So you're just saying efficiency and time. And I guess that's been a complaint from outside vendors, is that we don't acknowledge time is money to them. So
Can we make it like 10% for a certain number, 15 for another number, 20% for a smaller number, 25% for something like that?
Just like under $50,000 if it's 25%.
I don't know what the right number would be.
Yeah, but under X amount,
Yeah, but I
25%.
think this one concerns me.
Okay. And that's why I'm pointing it out. And that's what we're asking for, that feedback.
well, I think also it protects the procurement officer.
Yeah.
I think it goes both ways.
Mhm.
So
But I understand your rationale, because if you've got a $50,000 contract and it goes up 10% to $55,000, and you call everybody in here to come in and defend why they're going to charge you now an hourly rate to attend the meeting, now it's going to be up $6,500. It just doesn't make sense. You just rationally go through the process, and they defend it with you. $1 million, on the other hand, it's a
And I appreciate
whole
that.
other league.
I do. I appreciate that. There is a limit. And,
Well, like in the baseball.
yeah, true.
change order there could be done on substantial, you know?
And they should be questioned.
Pardon me?
And they should be questioned.
Yeah. The council should know about that.
Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, council members, one of the, it's one of those, baseball, for example, I would almost be hard-pressed to authorize much without council approval. You know there are sensitive issues, you know there are sensitive ones and some that aren't. The ones that brought this to our attention were like the smaller dollars, normal course of business, that would take unusual time. The next item is the current code doesn't allow for any impractical situations. We've proposed an authority that will allow the procurement officer to write a determination that says it is impractical to get 3 quotes, or it is impractical to go out for a formal solicitation, and document the reasons. It could very well be that there are only 2 vendors that can supply the item or the service. Current code says you will get 3 regardless. There is no exceptions to it. As I said early on when we started, we're trying to add flexibility and still accountability to the process. That is a very needed item in this particular proposed code, is to be able for procurement officer, for lack of a better person at this point, to make a determination that says under these circumstances it is not practical to get the 3 quotes. Okay.
Remind me what the ceiling is that you have to bring us a contract anyhow. Is it 100?
You know, they're really, I am not sure, and I will defer to Larry or Brian. I don't believe that there is a written policy at this point where a contract has to come to council if it is budgeted. Is that correct? Rory, can...
That's the way this reads.
So if a contract's budgeted, again, 6-figure amount, and the procurement officer deems that the situation is impractical. Can't talk. And it's a 6-figure deal. Who's making?
It won't.
Who's balancing and checking that situation?
Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, and I also, the council members, I also refer to Council Member Lord's comment a moment ago. While I can stand here and tell you that I would never do it, that is where the regulations need to be defined. It says under what circumstances that will happen or will not happen. And we may put a dollar limit as to what that is. I mean, there may be, I can't stand here tonight and tell you that the dollar limit is X dollars that should go to council. But this is the feedback that we're looking for in order to refine this process.
If the competitive bid process is taking place, I don't see a big problem with $250,000 or whatever the ceiling is that you all think is rational and come back and defend it, going to contract or letting the contract and allowing that to proceed. But $250,000 and the procurement officer has deemed it's impracticable. I can't talk tonight. Impracticable.
Well, it also states in here disadvantage. It's a disadvantage to the city also.
Right, but
if you
right.
read under the
Right.
3.515.
just when you get into the larger figures, I'm much more at least me personally, I'm much more sensitive about checking and balancing those situations. So while I might let a $250,000 contract go if it's been competitively bid, I don't know that I would feel as confident about that if you claim this.
And, excuse me, Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, council members, what I think, what we're really talking where these, even though these may be in the code, again, the current code only has one out, so to speak, as far as getting quotes or bids or going for solicitation. That's a sole source. Currently, under the city's method of doing business, anyone is making a sole source determination.
Not a good idea. Not a good idea.
I hear you. So that is what competition in practical will do. Is it may not be a sole source. There may be two vendors out there, but the code says you have to have three. So what do you do?
Oh, didn't
And
you
that's
have
what we're
something-
trying-
So didn't you have something with the streets? The
The slurry.
the slurry.
Yeah, but we see that contract.
Yeah, but
Comes
there
to
was-
us. I mean,
yeah,
you
there-
cut- you have that
what,
check
There was
in
one
there.
company?
One company.
One company.
Right, Southwest Slurry.
So that would help you.
And
in
that would
this
have to
case.
go through a sole source.
Yeah.
And it can be determined by anyone. And I've seen some very unique determinations as to why they're sole source. So what we're trying to do is make it, add the flexibility to the code. And with the procurement officer writing that determination, there is some accountability. And again, I'm accountable to Larry, who, ultimately as the procurement officer is accountable to the city manager that would delegate that.
Well, how would you determine to put a cap on this?
Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, Councilmember Sousa, other council member, that's probably the feedback I'm looking for, if you feel there needs to be a cap on it, as to a dollar amount. It's hard to put a dollar amount on these sometime. If you have a situation where, for sake of argument, you say the cap is $100,000 and we need to do the purchase, it's not an emergency. We have the time to go through the normal solicitation process, which would be a formal solicitation, but we are pressed for time, then that means that because there was only two that we knew of initially, we have to come to you because the code currently says you must have three. So you're the only body that can overrule on that one. So if we need the dollar limits, I mean, I'm open. I'm trying to make it so that it's workable and expeditious for everybody involved and keep you still informed of what's
That one
working.
item will deserve thought on our part then, the feedback to you.
Yes,
Okay.
it's fine. Actually, as far as I'm concerned, you can reserve all of this. I mean, nothing's happening to this until we get your feedback, and we'll present those.
Bob, I guess I would like to hear, I'd like to see, not an answer necessarily right now, but not to tell you how to do the process, but I'd like to see if, maybe bring it up in one of your Tuesday management meetings and kick it around there and see what an appropriate dollar amount is. Because I think we have sole source on fire apparatus on some of them, and those are pretty big figures, pretty big numbers. It's not rational maybe to, have some of these numbers be at 100,000 or 250,000. Fire apparatus is 500 plus. And we've, every single time they've come in front of us, we've approved them, and they've moved on. But so maybe there's a way for us to handle these, some of the sole source stuff that happens on a regular basis, that we identify that. I don't want to convolute the process, but
Well, you
same
have the
time, I don't wanna
information
slow
of
it.
where the
I don't wanna
problems
slow
have
it
been
down.
in the last year and what departments did have that circumstances, and it would have been made easier if they didn't have to.
Right.
So you have that information, we don't. So maybe you could gather some of that information and share that with us. That would help us make a decision.
Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, Councilmember Lord, other council members. It's not any one department.
I'm sure it's many.
It, like I say, over the years has become an easy out for the quotes and a way for the department to be able to get their job done in an expeditious manner. The fire trucks, for example, We made a determination that Pierce, because of the other fire trucks, to standardize on Pierce, which reduces the chief's overall operating costs because of, parts and repairs and this type of thing are then uniform. There is truly only one sole source in Arizona and in the world for a Pierce fire truck coming into Goodyear, Arizona, and that's the local vendor who then purchases it through Pierce. So some of these, and the fire truck is one that I am well aware of, and it was more than justified. So do you want to see each one of those every time? And it might be that, when these determinations are made, they come to you for approval, and then we don't. So anyway,
I would just hate, the matrix was done so that we become a more efficient city. So I just hope, as we go through these discussions, that our trust factor is kind of not where it should be for this type of position. So that otherwise we're going to go back to doing business like we've done before. So we have to come to terms with this on where that trust factor is going to level off.
I have a couple of questions. There was mentioned in here of pre-qualified contractors. If a department was to go off of that list of pre-qualified people, would that help them not have to go through a bidding process because they are selecting someone that you've already put through the grind that's on the list? I get concerned a little bit of tying our department's hands, and so I do appreciate the thresholds being hired for the informal and formal bids. I think that's probably advantageous, but in my own business, I don't have a procurement. I guess I'm the procurement officer. I write out the checks, So, this is something a little new to me, and so I get a little concerned of holding departments back, of doing day-to-day business routines that are now being held back by a lot of red tape. And I hope that, even though I want accountability and I want the best price for everything, I just want to make sure that you will have enough staff to take on this extra task. And I do also wonder how this is going to affect certain things, a little more specific, like some of our committees, and how that money will be handled, and also certain situations like gain events, things like that.
That's budgeted events, no.
So-
That's where we have to keep in mind. We have to keep in mind that we're not talking about what we've already approved in a budget. This is beyond that.
Beyond that.
Beyond that. You have to keep that
And that's
in mind.
and that's what I'm learning. So that's why I question those things. So I know I
Bob,
put a few things out there at you.
I think there's some agreement or consensus that you need more flexibility in code for these types of situations, but maybe not as much as we understood you were seeking. There's somewhere in between, if you and the staff would look at that.
right, okay.
Okay.
Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, Councilmember Osborne and Lord, and other council members, probably something that I am remiss in telling you is that when the code would go into effect, there will be delegations from the procurement officer to the director. Those actual dollar limits and items have not been determined yet. That will be determined with discussions with each individual director. Currently, in my office, we have 3 people, including myself. There is no way that we could do that, and that's not the intent. But the intent is to at least have a code that documents the process that should be a delegation that goes back, and then there can be follow-up on the delegation and was the process followed. And if not, is it a training issue? We need to address it.
So to run efficiently, they've got to have enough staff to.
Well, and they have to cross checks.
I'm sorry, so back to the pre-qualified,
Excuse me, would you refer me to that one, please?
let's see, where did I see that?
Your memory is better than mine.
3-5-3, pre-qualification of contractors. So I'm assuming that there's going to be a list. Yeah. Well,
That may be a hangout from your state.
there's a definitions section, and then there's methods of source selection, pre-qualified contractor selection.
Would that be like your on-call architecture, on-call services type contracts that you might have for pothole lane, or you might have for lane striping on an emergency situation and that sort of thing?
Yes. Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, Councilmember Osborne. If you will, I believe the very last sentence of that does indicate that we would still be going to a bid. You may get a pre-qualified list that would be a little more, you already have. I'll give you a good example of one we did in the past was a sanitation. Prior to putting the solicitation out, we went through and we did a pre-qualification on the containers that were going to be used there. I think we had 3 different manufacturers that were qualified to submit a bid that the contractor could buy those containers. That's the pre-qualification. That's what we're referring to. We're not saying that we necessarily are going to go from that list and just buy.
I was hoping that was.
So a pre-qualified vendor wouldn't fit under the category of water, wastewater services, where they would say it's going to be for the calendar year, fiscal year of 2008. Changing a defective valve is $1,500 plus time and services or something. You know, I mean, oftentimes service departments work off of a fixed list. They make a list at the beginning of the year, and they work off of that for the year. Would that not be a pre-qualified?
It actually, I guess you could define it to that. In that particular example, we are in the process now of doing a couple of bids that we're going to go out to bid for traffic signal replacement parts for traffic signals. There are numerous manufacturers. We will pick a manufacturer, and we will then be buying off their catalog. Not necessarily each individual item will go out to bid, but we will basically go to the process. They will offer the discounts. We will make an evaluation, and we will award multiple contracts to be able to purchase at the time. Could be a pre-qualified list if you want to, yes. I confuse that one?
Could be, should be.
Well, we just say it is. It is a pre-qualified list, but it's actually will end up in a bid award to those vendors that
Such that, you know, you get the thing awarded in July, and you come next May, it's the first time you go back to that contractor, and you would go back to the catalog that they had on file with you, and they have to honor that price.
we've already gone, right.
Right.
Of course, there will be clauses in the contract that will allow for some price escalation. Yes. The current code, I have changed pages on you there, but the current code does not allow for the use of any current technology, such as online bidding, the utilization of reverse auctions, vendor registration, the electronic. All this will do will allow for that, the use of those methods, and take us out of the strictly paper age.
So we'll go out of the Stone Age now. Okay.
Right. Cooperative purchasing agreements are not recognized by the current code. This will allow the procurement officer to enter an agreement with a cooperative purchasing concern, whether it be another city to utilize their contract, a couple of acronyms, a SAVE contract, which is a group that does the solicitations on numerous different items, and counties and cities and states are eligible to use it. So we would be able to use those contracts without coming to council and having a special meeting for that one.
So we've been able to do it in the past, but we just don't, but it has to come to council.
Comes to council, and they have been coming through. It's been considered an IGA, and it's not really, because it has, all it's doing is, we've got several that we're utilizing, that some are called IGA, some aren't, and the terminology is not uniform, but we have been using them, yes. And it saves the city a lot of time and effort and money. Someone else is going out, and we possibly could be getting a better price because it's not just us buying.
Using that as an example, Bob, would be the police vehicles. They're bought through a pool, is that correct?
Mayor Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor Antoniak, Councilmember Sousa, currently we are utilizing the state of Arizona's contract for police vehicles. That is a part of a cooperative that we are a member of.
In deference to you, Bob, let's waive the formal acknowledgments here. We need to roll.
Okay, I appreciate it. I can roll. Our current code doesn't have in place, there's no rules in place or regulations to define the current code. It just says that if you have a sole source, you don't have to go through the solicitation process. It does not give you any guidelines as to what a sole source or what the requirements may be. Has not been a concern with the city, and it's for future use only. The current contract does not have any provisions to debar or suspend a contractor for any provision, for any reason. I'm sure that if we went far enough legally, we could do it under the current situation, but we would write some rules and regulations that would define what those circumstances are. No provisions for a demonstration project under the current code. We're proposing that to be allowed to participate in a demonstration, and at the end of the demonstration, it could be determined practical or impractical to go back out and go to a solicitation. If we had a vendor that proposed a demonstration, let's just say, and I'll pick on Sean a minute, for some type of a water clarification process, we could go through the demonstration. The vendor could put his money out there, and at the end of that process, by the current code, we're bound to go out and go to a solicitation. It may not be practical to do it. It may cost us more money and time and in the final product. We have no requirements in the code currently for any background checks. We are proposing that all contracts for services rendered to a minor, that the contractor and his employees go through background checks. Currently, a contract for a professional service is exempt. We're not saying that in the future it would not be exempt, but it will define the extent of a professional service. And there may be times when, because of uniformity and for past work, it's advantageous for the city to continue with a vendor.
Back up on one of your things, Bob. You talked about the background checks. How do we handle sensitive departments such as IT or police or fire, in terms of, or even water for that matter? I mean, you get into a bunch of different security issues where people are pretty sensitive. Do we do background checks on individuals? Do we require the companies to have on file background checks, such that, say, somebody's putting a security system in the police department? Seems to me that you wouldn't.
Currently, we have no requirement in the code. It may be something that is determined to be done. ROIC may have some issue and may, require it when we get into some of the IT-sensitive stuff. But there is no requirement in the code that says you'll go through background checks. And I think when we were thinking of this, our main concern was services to a minor.
Sure.
And currently, that's what we've limited it to, while there may be others that we just awarded a contract for new janitorial services, and that was a part of that there would be background checks on those employees. So there are cases where you would do them just as a matter of just course of business. If there's no more questions on the code, I'll proceed to the council member.
I have a question on it.
Yes.
One more on the professional services. If we found that the professional services that we've hired in the past, we've contracted with in the past, have really been less than adequate, and yet we come around again, and this has happened to this city, come around again the second time for an additional contract, and we go back to that same contractor, is there some way that can be at least looked into it in more depth than what we're doing? I don't know if you follow what I'm getting at.
I think I do. Let me repeat that. I think what I understand is we have a contractor that their performance has not been adequate.
Right.
That we issue another contract. Correct?
Right.
It's not a code issue. It is something that can be looked at. It's one of the things that it comes down to contract administration. And when a contractor does not perform as expected, it needs to be documented. Currently, I think in a lot of cases we lack that documentation, and we have that feeling, and all of us have some knowledge, but we don't have anything basically to hang our hat on. So we need to do a better job administering those contracts.
But couldn't we just put a non-performance clause in that the second time around? A certain fine, a certain amount of money, a certain amount, I mean...
Take it farther into the future. Can't we direct you in the code that each contract has a section of performance indicators? And whether or not you have any, at least that triggers you, the contract writer, and triggers the staff when they're doing their contracts, that there are certain performance indicators. That would address Frank's point up front.
Yes.
It would to a point.
Right.
And then there's, and what I'm hearing from staff is that when we come into this situation, sometimes there isn't a better, in the feeling of the staff, there isn't a better contractor out there. So we go back to this same one. And we've done that, and it has been very unsatisfactory, as far as I'm concerned. As a member of this council, what I've seen in past performance, some of our contractors, I do not understand why we continue to hire these people back. It's beyond me.
Is that a code issue, though?
Can that be put in the code?
There is language in all of our contracts that allows us to cancel for non-performance, declaring in default, and very seldom, and I can't tell you of a specific time that we've ever canceled a contract due to performance. I'm sure there have been some. I think that sometime, especially on the professional services contracts, we've utilized them because we've worked with them, they've worked well, and we may at the time not consider that performance detrimental to future business with him. But I understand what you're saying, and we can tighten it up and put something in the code.
I'd like to see it made a code issue to a point. I know we can't completely because it's very subjective, but in one respect, we need to put some limitations in there somewhere. And if you'd look at that, I appreciate it.
We currently and I think Public Works was the first one that we used the form on, but we just released a contractor deficiency form that it is in a test stage right now, but if a contractor does not perform, we've asked in the case of Public Works to fill out the form, give it to us. They can pursue it with the contractor, and we document it in his file. So when renewal time comes around, there's documentation that he did not perform. But that's one of the things I think we need to do is document the reasoning on it in order to stay out of that.
I think it's very important.
Any other questions on the code changes? I know the mayor wants to go see the ball game, so I've got the quick resolution.
I really couldn't care less about it.
I hear you.
I just want us to roll, that's all.
Tell our spring.
Get in the second gear here, let's see what we can do.
Ball games. Football games.
Councilmember Sousa, this will address your original question concerning the $30,000 that was the amount for the city manager to approve. That amount, which I don't recall exactly when now, probably a year was changed, and I believe it went up to 75. Okay. That amount is the amount that the city manager could authorize an expenditure that was not previously budgeted. Okay. It is not tied to the procurement method. It was the authorization for the city manager to approve up to $75,000 for an expense that had not previously been approved in the budget. Okay. The proposed resolution, and as I said earlier, while these two are related, they're not dependent on each other. The proposed resolution gives the city manager $100,000 authority to approve a purchase that was not budgeted. This was a figure that was just, with discussion with the city manager's office, we thought might be reasonable. We're strictly asking for your feedback. There needs to be some amount. I'm not sure 100% what that is. We felt that given today's budget, and that the city manager is responsible for a fairly large budget on a day-to-day basis, $100,000 discretionary, so to put it, would not be unreasonable. So it actually is going from 75 to 100, or we would propose in this resolution that that's what it be.
So where is the accountability of that?
accountability is between the city manager and the city council.
So the expenditure would have to come to us for approval.
It should be, and I don't remember now, have you been having to report those expenditures to the council after the fact?
I haven't been having them, not lately.
You don't buy.
So would it be better that it's up to $100,000 with notification? You know, with some sort of formal notification? I mean, because if all of a sudden, you know, you start to see 10, 12, 15 of these
check
things,
is
Yeah, that
wrong.
adds up.
that adds up quick.
Right.
Can't
Oh,
go
it can,
100.
yes, absolutely. You know, part of our discussion centered around the rate at which we're growing and those things that may be unanticipated at budget time that may now all of a sudden need to be taken care of in a fairly short period of time. So it gives him that discretion.
It would seem rational to me. There's some sort of notification, say above 50, between 50 and 100. I mean, you're going to have unbudgeted requests for $500, $1,000, $1,500 here and there that are just going to be necessity. You just got to get it done. I don't want to know about every, you know, $1,500, you know.
I'm not sure I'm interested in that, in just moving this up to 100,000 from 75,000.
I don't see that we gain a lot by doing that. Don't you want to change it?
Our main reason for proposing the resolution is when the current code goes in, it doesn't allow him anything. So it does say that it can be done by resolution. So we could just put 75. The resolution will need to be passed based on whatever your amount is once the code goes in. Because currently, the code doesn't provide that, which I think in the resolution form, it's a little more flexible. So we're actually asking for feedback.
$100,000.
I think the word is too.
We're asking for feedback, so, and you don't have to tell me tonight, oh, we want it to be, so.
I just heard Dick mumble, leave it where it's at.
Yeah, I don't feel these two.
It doesn't matter either way.
This doesn't bother me at all.
75 or 100, I mean.
Put it at that level.
Well, the 100 bothers me. I don't think we need it.
You know, the numbers are relatively close,
No need to make an argument.
so why don't we just stay where we are and,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Any further questions on either the resolution or the code? I know you have either sat up at night reading the code or you will, so.
I just have one point, I think it's for the attorney. If we do this, we're assigning you quite a bit of responsibility. And I know you're up to it, that's not an issue. But in view of that, his responsibility regarding the expenditure of dollars, large amounts of dollars, should he be within the same chain of command as under the finance officer? Or should there be they would report, be on the same level and report maybe to the same person, a department head in your case, obviously you be a department, Larry's a department. I know in the Air Force we would never have contracting and finances under the same guy. And I'm not, it's been a long time since I was in the Air Force, I don't remember the rationale for it, but I just remember that was true. And they are dealing with a lot of money, both of them. I don't know. It's worth looking at.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure.
Maybe there's nothing
Structure
wrong.
down at there.
It'd be interesting to hear how other Arizona municipalities have done it. You know, if it's not a direct move of your department, maybe a dotted line to the city manager, so there's dual responsibility there, or something. But it seems
What do the other cities do?
comments rational. I don't know. That's what I.
Anybody know?
It's mixed, from what I know.
There's
Some
procurement
are
departments and finance
separate,
departments.
some are
What about the
reporting
bigger
finance.
cities, you know, the cities that are bigger populations? I mean, we're a growing city, so I guess I mean, I wouldn't want to compare us to some small city. I would like,
I think
I don't like the comparison.
As I discuss this issue with our peers around the state, what you see is that the finance department is not uncommon for me, but within the finance department, or in the larger cities, when the budget departments split out as a separate, it often goes with the budget function as compared to the accounting function, which you often see in the finance department. I think that's where the separation is. We did have this function in the budget office for a while, but felt with the procurement code changes and a number of key issues there that it was very important that we had it as its own division within the finance department to give it that autonomy that you're implying with it. But most cities in Arizona have it in one of those areas. Oftentimes finance is referred to as administrative services that encompasses it also. We'd be happy to give you a survey of communities that show where it is.
Yeah, I would just like the attorney to look at it and see if there's a possible conflict, that's all, unless someone wants more.
That's fine.
It's just a concern to me, because we're giving you a lot of authority, which is therefore going to Larry too. And he's the guy in charge of money. So,
Any further questions, comments? I would ask you to please give me your feedback. Would like to finalize this with your changes and come back before you.
okay.
Vote on it.
Do you want to, Elizabeth, do you want to tell us what we said? Or?
I hope she took good notes.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay. Well, we'll just trust you, I guess. We have.
Mayor, would you like a summary or not?
I wouldn't mind a summary of what you picked up, because you certainly asked for our input, so let's see if you got it.
Summarize, please. My memory doesn't last that long. I could
No,
read
I
my
don't
notes and
expect
come
you
back.
to.
Yes.
Kind of.
Right, council members, I did take notes. I mean, I do think that we do need some direction, though. We do have some requests for dollar limits and things such as that. I don't know that Bob and I are really in that position to set the dollar limits, but I did take all your concerns, and we definitely appreciate it, and we really appreciate your input. So we want to make this work for everybody.
I know that.
And I do hear your concerns about placing a lot of authority in the procurement officer. I'll be honest with you, that's not something that we really thought about because we trust Bob so much. But Councilmember Lord made a good point. You know, what if we go through, a different person that gets this responsibility that may not be as trustworthy as Bob?
And Bob's not young anymore,
So we definitely do appreciate your input, and I would like to get the dollar limit, so I think we need that.
so are we going to just get a list of what our input was?
Yes, I will do that.
Could we
Recap it.
get
Yeah, that's
that
what we
in our
need.
boxes? So
Capsulize everything.
I'd like to see staff deliberate on the dollar amounts before.
No, I definitely do that. I agree.
I don't know about.
We don't.
I think it's
Give us
artificial
ideas.
for us to say 250 or 500 or whatever the number.
Yeah, I agree.
Just go ahead.
Oh, sure, okay.
If I can go through, and that way you can see if we're heading in a wrong direction. The comment about emergency purchases, what was requested is that we include in the processes to report back. The only part that wasn't clear is that the mayor and council or just the mayor. I will assume mayor and council unless we hear differently on that one. But that is where the procurement officer declared an emergency.
I think it was for the whole council.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be the whole council. The change order limit of 10%, what you suggested was a tiered system. 10% would probably be the case on the larger contracts. That percentage might increase but still have a cap on a smaller contract. I doubt you'd see anything higher than 25% at $50,000 only because that was specifically referred to, but we'll develop a matrix to present to you for your comments. The impracticable situations was an area of concern. I don't know that there was clear resolution amongst you as to how to deal with that. At the very least, I think what was suggested is that there be a report back mechanism of what those circumstances are that created that. And those were the three primary ones that I marked down as far as future follow-up.
I have a question following up on that, and this will save me answering this question once a month of, do I need to go to council? In our old code and in the proposed new code, if you have approved a budgeted line item, say it's $10 million for something, and we go out and bid it, and we get a contract for $9.5 million, we technically do not have to come back to council. That contract is signed and awarded, and you never see it again. I get a question often, we have a budget line item, it came in under budget, it's X amount of dollars, do I need to go back to council? I have a rule of thumb, the closer it gets to $1 million, the more I think you need to go to council. But Vice Mayor Antoniak referenced $250,000 a minute ago as maybe being what you're comfortable with. Is there a number that, even though it's a budgeted line item, you want to see it when it's finally awarded? And I just picked up on that, and it's something that's in the old code, it's in the new code too. So is there a dollar? I hope I explained that well.
You did.
Yeah, you did. I guess what I was getting back, without flipping it back to you, Rourke, what I was saying is kind of poll your directors and figure out what's the rational nexus between that dollar amount and the comfort level. I mean, you tell me a fire apparatus costs $500,000, no big deal. You tell me Sean Bradford's going to go out and spend $500,000, I might want to take a closer look. So I just, sorry, Sean.
Let me flip it around one more time. They don't like to write coax. So
Agreed.
What's your comfort level is? What do you want to see as the elected officials on the expenditure of public funds?
Well, I think we need to be
Seven figures,
realistic.
I have that same kind of willy-nilly threshold of $1 million. I want to know we're spending it. When we're paving streets all around town, we're putting up streetlights all around town. I don't want to see every $75,000 pole that goes up that Cato's got to put up and his department has to, do. I just expect the streetlight to be put up just like every other citizen. I expect there to be competitive bidding. If you go sole source, that's a whole different conversation. I think you bifurcate the two. Sole source and competitive bid are, for me, two different comfort levels. Sole source, the threshold might be $250,000. It might be lower. Competitive bid, go through the bidding process, I'm pretty comfortable. Speaking on behalf of myself, I'm pretty comfortable at $1 million.
I am also.
I'd go for that.
Well, it'll save me one question a month if we have that.
I think there has to be some rationale from staff. I use Pierce because I know it's a good example. It doesn't seem to make sense. If you've got a budgeted fire truck and it costs $600,000, we expect that. We anticipate that that's getting done. So, and that is sole source. So there are some unique situations in there. We'll have to figure out how to address in the code.
You gave us some feedback, though. That's one thing that popped in my mind as we were talking about it tonight, though. So, thanks.
Okay. Any other comments? Was it Larry? Did he capture everything? Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Open now for council. Any items that you'd like to update the staff and council on? Yes.
I got one. We were supposed to have a council retreat or advance this coming week, but we postponed it due to management. And I've been having some thoughts for the past several months and was going to bring an idea up at the council advance. And I wrote something so I didn't mince my words, but an ethical and open government is a principle that I hold near and dear to my heart.
Slow up and talk about
I firmly believe we have created government to represent all individuals, and therefore all of our business as elected officials and professional staff ought to be discussed and disclosed openly. As elected officials, if we are to represent fellow citizens in a fair, impartial, and transparent manner, we should disclose all potential ethical issues and manage our actions accordingly. Past, current, and future elected officials have, should, and will continue to be challenged with this, and I ask
whether the individuals who elected them will question their actions or perceived actions on the local government's behalf. As one of the 4 fastest growing suburbs in the U.S., I believe it is incumbent upon us to ride the face of the wave regarding issues that may compromise the integrity, honesty, openness, and faith in our local government and its leaders, both elected and staff. Today, I call on my fellow local elected officials to engage in a dialogue regarding the future of our actions and the ethics surrounding those actions. I suggest that we as a council deliberate on and direct staff to take action on the appointment of an ethics commission in order to review our current policies as well as recommend policies for the entire city, including ethical standards for elected and professional staff. I have 2 cornerstone thoughts for the formation of such a committee. The committee should be comprised of Goodyear citizens, ethics professionals or professional, former, current elected officials, former and current management staff, and others with experience in fields we desire to have addressed following a dialogue between all 7 of us. And 2, that the city contract an ethics professional to facilitate such a discussion with the council and further the appointed commission. The question I have for you all is, will you join me and ask staff to bring back a COAC to us in the first quarter of this year?
I think it's important. I think Avondale has one. I think they just did one this last year. Was it last year that they did it?
We discussed it back in 2006, and there's been a section that's been withstanding in our green book and our policy manual that has never been addressed. And I feel like there's a lack of guidance and direction as an elected official, and that I can look back on our policies and say, this is the way I'm supposed to go about declaring a conflict or which I've done a number of different times through our attorney's office.
See, where I think it would be helpful is when the newly elected person comes on board. It takes you so long to figure out the system.
Really?
Yeah. By the time you're going out the door, you've kind of figured it out. So it would be nice, I think it would be helpful to that person coming in to have that paper, to read that through, and to know. Because I think sometimes people may do things not intentionally, just because of ignorance. And so that would delete that part of the formula.
Anyway, my desire is to have the attorney's office bring back a COAC, or somebody in management bring back a COAC that would define how we would go about an ethics commission. And we'd start to have a dialogue of what is comprised within that commission and the charge for such a commission.
Does the National League of Cities have they do have a set of ethical standards and things. In fact, we have copies of them. In fact, we should all have copies.
But there's nothing in our council policies and directives that,
He's saying directly for us.
guide us. There's very little.
Anybody else?
We need 3.
He needs
so.
3 people, so.
Yeah. Well, I don't think no one's going to vote against that. Right? Yeah. But I do think what you need to incorporate is that which exists today that's available to us, or that is intended to be enforcing on us. Okay?
Potentially. I mean, I think it's a dialogue. I know we can't embrace necessarily on the dialogue this evening. I bring it up as an idea. We can.
Sure. That's where it needs to be.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But, I mean, as a City of Mesa employee, when I walked into the City of Mesa as an employee, I got an ethics manual. So I think it's full circle. I think it's, how do we, it goes to the very nature of what we discussed tonight in terms of procurement.
With everything.
Okay. Yeah. Other comments from the council on current events? Pardon?
I can't remember. I've been on vacation.
Welcome back, right? And manager summary, I think we sort of had it through Larry. But
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we had the summary. Just on behalf of staff, welcome back and Happy New Year for 2018.
I want to mention our conversation because it was brought up on the retreat.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we're looking at trying to find a council plan for retreat for latter part of February. We're trying to find some dates now. We feel at this point we need to get direction from council as we get into the budget process. So I was talking to the finance director earlier today, and we'll have some numbers where we can start to bring some parameters on how we're going to be having to face this year's budget. So budget would be part of it, but really looking at council to try and give us direction on where we spend our energies and our resources for next year. So we'd like to have that in February before we get into the budget process much further. The question to council is that a half a day, or do you want it, our typical format for that's been Friday evening and half a Saturday, but really open to what council would want, because staff can do either. And we can have it on one full day, one half day, split up a day, 2 days, I should say.
Well, how much time do we need? Do we need more than a half day?
It is varied. One of the things we're also doing is we'll have Lori Hillebrands ask for your input as far as what you would like to see on the advance, and we're going to be doing that this week, so that may start to help us determine how long we need to have the advance for.
Okay, yeah.
And are we calling it advance or retreat?
If we're going out of town, it's retreat. If not, it's advance. That's the way
I don't think we're going out of town.
Yeah,
Looking ahead,
the original idea was to wait for the new city manager, but we need to prepare, help the staff with the budget, and
Yeah.
we need to discuss those issues, particularly in a year in which finances are going to be, it's a different ballgame this year.
so how it's going to last too.
Yeah, I know. So we'll do that, and
Yes. We'll seek your input on some of the topics, and we'll also be spending some of the time on budget and how much we have to work with itself. So it's kind of a back, come back to you and look at whether it's a half a day or longer.
I guess really determines on how much material we want to cover.
That's correct.
Okay.
That ought to get them.
and this ethics commission idea may be a good subject to be brought up in that one. So maybe
Well, I think that'll
delay.
work.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.